Good day to you, Rabbi.
Good day, Joe.
So I see we're thinking about what's in the news. My eye was caught the other day by a senior politician, I won't name names, who mentioned that it's time that people face the fact that the United States is a Christian country. Now, my wife, who is Jewish, took exception with that almost immediately. And I would agree with her that that's a very narrow perspective. But freedom of a religion is undebatable as being part of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But I've heard you often speak on this point. Can you enlighten us with your wisdom a little bit?
Certainly. I'd like to point to Europe throughout history as our backdrop or as an example, because we can see what happens when a country declares that everyone in that country must adhere to this religion. And we can see the wars that took place over the centuries. And so let's keep Europe in the background as our example of what can happen and why the framers, the founding fathers, they recognized the dangers of a state religion. So let's make that our starting point, Joe. Let's start with the dangers of making the state a specific religion, so that anyone that moves there or belongs to that country has to belong to that religion. And again, if you have any doubts about what happens when you do that, look at the history of Europe. We have the 100 Years' Wars. We have the Protestant and Catholics fighting. We have the fights within the UK, within England itself, between Protestants and Catholics. And we can see what happens when we have a state-run religion. And then we can look at the former Soviet Union, which deemed there should be no state religion, and that no one should be religious or practice anything. And so when you ban religions, look at what happens. So now that we have that as our backdrop, let's take a look at what the framers of our Constitution had in mind. So they were watching Europe. They saw what happened when the state declares a religion. By state, I mean country. When the country declares a religion, they said, okay, let's put in our document. Each individual has a right to practice their own religion. We don't want the state dragged in to support any given religion. And therein lies the danger. And that's why I brought up Europe as the example. When we drag the state in to use state laws to support my religious views, it's always had a bad outcome historically. And it doesn't allow for different groups and diversity to take place. And even within our own country, we saw the way that the Mormons were treated, and they continued to move west. And even when they went west, how they were treated, and the deaths and the destruction and the pain and agony, because other religious groups would not accept their beliefs and leave them alone. That's all that the Constitution says. I want to practice my religion. No one says you can't practice it. And when we watch the news, the danger by that statement is we're dragging the government in to support a specific religious view. And we want to have the local laws support my religion. And it doesn't lend itself to a country where the individuals have different religions. Nothing says you can't practice your religion. Go practice.
But what about the snake handlers and the ganja smokers and the polygamy religions, or religions that allow polygamy, and not only allow it, but believe in it? Those are all things that basically violate laws in different states in the United States, and we enforce those.
Now we have to take a look at each state and why some of these things were banned. Drinking strychnine, handling poisonous snakes. The reason that that's banned is it was abused. It wasn't just within the religious community. People were being coerced. People were being embarrassed. It got beyond the belief of 4 or 5 people. And it provided to be a danger to young people, to children. And there is an obligation of society to protect the weak, to protect children, to protect seniors like myself, to take care of the veterans who fought for the country. There is a religious social obligation. And so we have to step back and look and say, okay, why were these enacted? And do they really pose a threat to the rest of society? And something like having many wives, which you and I have agreed to, totally escapes me, that in order to have a meaningful relationship with one other individual takes all my time and energy. That's me. Now, if someone else wants to have many partners, wants to have many wives, many husbands, sister wives, however you want to find them, we have to push back and say, okay, do their religious beliefs create a burden or a problem for people who aren't part of that culture or group? Or is this just for them to make that decision? Or are they forcing 13, 12-year-old, 16-year-old girls to get married? Then you've now stepped outside and you're now using your religion as a tool for power and control and to abuse someone else. So if it's just within your group, and would have to go group by group. This is part of our problem here. One size doesn't fit all. We want to take a look at what are we talking about? And many of the laws against polygamy were because people were against the Mormons. Had nothing to do with having more than one wife. That, when you look at the literature, that wasn't being analyzed. That wasn't being discussed. They were going after this group and their religious beliefs.
So if I was going to start a nationalist religion, and I firmly believed that the month of June should be clothing free, so that I should, as a part of my religious beliefs, be able to go naked wherever I wanted to, where would that fall in this process?
Now we're talking about freedom from religion. And the idea of the framers of the Constitution was not to impose religious beliefs on other people and not to do something that we find offensive in the 21st century. Maybe in the 25th century, it'll be culturally okay. You know, the rabbis address this, Joe. Dina de Malchuta Dina. The law of the country in which you reside is the law. Unless it forbids something according to Jewish practice. So there is no prohibition against Jews having multiple wives. You'll read the Bible. There's no prohibition. Nowhere is it prohibited. The rabbis, though, sat down and said, as good citizens, Dina de Malchuta Dina, as a good citizen, we want to acknowledge the laws of a country that are social laws, not based on religious practice. So if I start a religion that says I can go 1,000 miles an hour on the Beltway or 100, I can go any speed limit I want, that's my religious belief, you can't arrest me. The rabbis would say, Dina de Malchuta Dina, for safety, for concern, the law of the land has speed limits based on safety. This is not a violation of religious practices. They're not saying you can't keep kosher or that you can't lay tefillin or you can't observe the Shabbat. They're not violating any Jewish laws. This is a social contract. And as a good citizen, you want to abide by the social contract. So you can't use that. You can't say my religion says I should go around naked, because that's a violation of the social contract of how we view clothes and people. And therefore, Dina de Malchuta Dina, you want to say the law of the country, the law of the county. Now, there are nude beaches. There are enclaves. There are places you can go. So you're not prohibited. But what's being said here is for public safety and for what we consider courteous and respectful. It's not a violation. we're asking you to acknowledge that your beliefs or practices violate the social norm. And we're
Well,
not
one thing,
preventing you from going naked in your house or in your backyard or in your place of worship. We're not interfering with. We're now saying there's a difference between the public forum and your private place of worship.
well, one thing that I don't want to keep private is my admiration for you, Rabbi. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom. And I'm still going to look into that naked religion thing, but we'll have to save that for another day. Hopefully you'll join me.
Let me know when the month is, because then my wife and I will be certain to take a vacation.